Our last few days spent at the island of Lovend have been a bit wet and blustery, but we've enjoyed the scenery and have already spotted our next destination in the distance. The weather forecast for the next week's looking good, and just as we leave, the rain stops and the sky starts to clear. On this next leg, we're leaving Lovend and ultimately heading to the city of Bodø, but first we're going to go and check out the Svartisan glacier.
Lovend is only just outside the Arctic Circle, so as we sail northeast, it's not long before we unceremoniously cross the imaginary line into the Arctic. It's not been dark at night for a few weeks now, but this latitude marks the most southern point where the sun doesn't set at summer solstice.
Beside the fact that the images we'd seen of Svartisan looked amazing, we wanted to be able to see a glacier from the boat while we were up here, and though we tried to prepare as best we could, we had no idea if we'd actually make it to Svalbard or not, so it seemed an opportunity too good to miss. Since the 200 miles we'd covered to get up to Lovend were offshore, we noticed the landscape here certainly looked different, being much more mountainous than further down the coast. And although we could see what to expect from a distance at the top of the island we'd just been to, this still felt pretty dramatic. After a pleasant 50-mile sail, we entered the fjord and reached the foot of the glacier in the early evening.
The forecast for the next day predicted some warmer and windless conditions. At around 4:30 the following morning, I stuck my head out to see the fjord looking like a mirror. It was completely flat calm and was promising to be a glorious day.
Svartisan translates to the black ice, and the part you can see here is known as Engebrin. It's just a small part of one of the two large glaciers that make up the Svartisan National Park. It currently comes down to around 110 metres above sea level at this spot, which makes it the lowest glacier in Europe. Unfortunately, both the glaciers are now receding, and this has retracted between 10 and 15 metres per year since 1999. It can be hard to capture scale when taking these types of images, but I hope you can get a sense of the sheer volume of ice here, even on this small part of the glacier.
We left the fjord and started making our way north again. We decided to stop off at one of the islands for the night on the way to Bodø, so we pulled into the bay on the small island of Bolga. This is situated in the middle of a large group of islands and skerries. It's just a couple of hours sailing north of the fjord. Just as we were leaving, we put the engine into gear and it sounded as though someone was trying to beat a hole through the bottom of the hull. Also, when checking below to try and find the issue, there seemed to be a lot of engine vibration. We turned around and pulled onto the dock to try and find the source of the problem. So, with the camera attached to a pole, we eventually found this.
This is the zinc anode that clamps to the prop shaft, and it had somehow worked itself loose, slid up and jammed against the hull. If we hadn't have had the GoPro or another submersible camera, it'd have been much more difficult to trace this issue. When I initially watched the video, I was fully expecting to see something caught up on the prop, and so I missed this, and then I thought we could have a gearbox problem. But when Sally went back through the footage again, she noticed that the anode had shifted. Though we were lucky it didn't cause some pretty serious damage to the boat, so far there was no sign of any, and it seemed like a relatively simple problem to solve. So despite the temperature of the water, and only having a 2mm shorty wetsuit at hand, I begrudgingly took the plunge. The anode was jammed up really tight against the hull, so it needed to come off, but despite several attempts, the temperature of the water just made it impossible for me to hold my breath long enough to be able to remove the bolts that clamped it together. So, a few things here. I'm not Wim Hof, and that water was cold, so we needed to find another option.
How cold?
Yeah, that's cold.
The island only has a population of about 50 people, so unfortunately we couldn't find a diver or any scuba gear to hire. We did, however, find a dive shop just south of Bodø that would rent us some gear, so the solution we went with was to sail there.
We literally pushed the boat off the dock and set off on the 50-mile journey. Even though the visibility wasn't great, there was a steady light southwesterly wind which made it about as good as it was going to get. As you can see, the first 20 miles or so required some careful navigation, and knowing there was no possibility of being able to use the engine at any point, it did make us a little bit nervous.
We checked the chart and could see that Bodø had one long dock with an open side on the inner harbour. So we radioed through to the harbour master to check to see if there was a berth available with enough room for us to manoeuvre into. We had a lot going on at the time, but in hindsight we wish we had filmed sailing onto the dock here, as it all went unbelievably well.
We set off to catch the bus to take us to the dive centre that's next to the Solstrømmen. This is a narrow bottleneck between the sea and the fjord, and it creates one of the world's strongest tidal currents, where the water can flow through at over 8 knots.
Even though I wore a dry suit for warmth when I passed my paddy open water, being able to use it for buoyancy is an additional qualification, so I'm not actually able to hire one. So the excellent guys at the dive centre, unable to hire me a dry suit, gave me an old 8mm wetsuit that someone had donated to them 10 years ago. I think this was from the 1980s and a little bit on the snug side. As you can see, we've definitely not got that Caribbean bikini-clad clickbait type of thing going on. Look at these flippers. Stop it! Come on, help me! For God's sake! I can't move! But it was better than nothing. You have to help get in, I can't actually get in there.
Okay.
So after checking for any significant damage, I managed to take the anode off. We have another one on the end of the prop, so we weren't worried about this one being missing for a few months. And yes, we have made sure that this doesn't happen again in the future.
Leaving Bodø, we decide to sail a few hours up the coast and find an ice anchorage to relax in, while we wait for a weather window to head off further north to the Lofoten Islands.
Round to port.
In the next episode, we're sailing to Lofoten and we capture what's described by some as the most scenic view in the whole of Norway.